Well, good evening and welcome back to Fireplace Conversations. My name is Vinsha Klute. I'm the Executive Director of the Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance, and we're back with Fireplace Conversations. What an exciting topic we have for tonight, cultivating the ideal board culture. And tonight with me, I have on my left Mr. Cyril van Zyl. He started his banking career on 18 January 1982, the year I was born, in Okahania, and boasts 38 years experience in banking and financial services. He holds a bachelor's degree in business administration as well as a master's degree in business administration, both which he obtained from the University of Potchefstroom in South Africa. He was the executive director, the chief executive officer of FNB Namibia Unit Trust, executive officer of the retail segment of FNB, CEO of FNB Zambia, and CEO of FNB Namibia and First Rand Namibia. He served on a number of boards in the First Rand Group, both in Namibia and Zambia, and since his retirement from First Rand Namibia, he is currently serving on the board of 91 Namibia and is also the chairperson of the Development Bank of Namibia. And then, with nearly 30 years of executive experience right in front of me, Ms. Kauna Ndilula has pioneered several development interventions in the SME sector. She has put her wealth of management knowledge to work by founding BFS, which has injected over 1.8 billion in SMEs across numerous sectors, private and public alike. And she has served on various boards as well across the public and private sector, and equally so in the developmental field. She is the executive chairperson of the BFS groups of companies in Namibia and Mozambique, and she holds a Master of Development Finance and an MBA. And then on my right, I have Ms. Melanie Harrison, who joined Deloitte Namibia for the first time in 2005 as a junior IT audit consultant and left the firm in 2010 to join De Beers Marine Namibia as a senior internal auditor, and then later became their information security manager. In 2015, Melanie rejoined Deloitte as an associate director and was appointed as a risk advisory director for Deloitte Namibia in 2017. Early this year, Melanie was appointed as the country leader in June 2023. Congratulations. And a historic milestone for Namibian firm, as Melanie is the first female country leader and is also the first advisory director to assume the country leader role in Namibia. What an exciting and rich resume of my guest tonight. So, how board members communicate with each other, work as a team, or make decisions all define the culture of the board. A board's culture is further reflected in the traditions and habits that boards develop over time that set the standard for the way that board directors think and act. So board culture has a significant influence on the way boards carry out their work and shape board performance. Unlike other areas of board governance, like the composition of the board, succession planning, reporting by board members, board culture is less clearly defined and understood, and I think that's a true fact, this evening would really like to unpack this. And before we started, I said this is really close, is again another topic that's close to my heart, because I believe that the board culture really shapes the way that boards perform, and it really then speaks to how companies or entities perform. And to go right into it, I must say that tonight we are talking purely about the board and the board of directors, perhaps not necessarily about composition or their succession planning and so on, and definitely not about board management relationship, because we want to preserve that for another segment. And so I just want to go to Melanie or Ms. Harrison and say the relationship between the board members should be that of trust, respect, and candor. How best can we achieve a balance between this collegiality and directness in this relationship?
So I think we need to start off with defining what is culture. And culture is really about how do we do things, the way that we act, the way we show up. And for a board, often the board's also a team. So when they form, and teams have a normal stages, they've got the forming, norming, storming, and performing stage that a board goes through. And I don't think that we always as boards spend enough time to unpack and understand each other, understand the skill set of the board, the values and the beliefs of the individuals, and define the ways of working. Because that's ultimately what it would be to drive how we do things around here. If we as a team decide this is how we want to work, this is how we want to show up for the organization. And I think that's key in the beginning, to take those aspects and, you know, have that candid conversation with another to define this is how we want to do things. These are the shared beliefs, and this is how we want to set the tone at the top and the way we will be working.
So I think that was very interesting, and I'll come back to the other speakers, how you defined, you said norming, storming, and then you mentioned two other things. So that is probably very important in defining the culture in the board setting. And I just want to talk about that trust, respect, candor, that communication that must be candid. How can we establish or maintain that relationship, as I've asked Ms. Harrison, Mr. Fansel?
I think I just want to pick up on something that Melanie has mentioned. Candor, if you unpack that, also means having an open, honest, and frank discussion. So the whole issue in my mind around board and creating this culture in board, firstly, it must be deliberate. Because a culture will develop. If you allow it to develop by itself, it turns into these negative things that you talk about. If the board gets together and deliberately decides to form a culture, which it is that they want to do, and that is, I think we typically make the mistake at board level that we develop a corporate or organizational culture, but we never think about the board culture and the way we want to deal with one another. So I think that's the one thing. There's not a right or wrong way in which we talk with one another when it comes to being candid or being respectful. If you look at some of the books that people have written about themselves, Brand Pretorius, for instance, was a very soft-spoken guy in the way in which he managed people. But when you look, for instance, at the CEO at the time of Shoprite Checkers, was a very aggressive kind of person. I think if we just respect the person in which we talk, personalities differ. And I think that's the point that becomes important when we're in boards. It is important for us to understand our fellow board members' personalities, but also our own personality. And to be aware that when you interact with people is that you always respect the individual. So you deal with the issue. But we must be careful in these conversations, depending on what culture it is that you talk about. If it's a disciplined culture, sometimes you have to be strong. You have to be candid to make things happen. But you must also always respect the individual. But we can never be what we call a corporate coward. You can never, not speak up when something is wrong, when something goes against the culture of the organization. You then have to stand up and speak up and do something about that.
He mentioned something about corporate coward, and I'd like you to, in light of this question, just talk about that a bit. I know you, and I know you're quite a strong personality, but you are also soft-spoken. And how can that strongness come forth and avoiding that cowardness in a board setting amongst each other? And also, and balancing that with overly strong personality.
Yeah. Thanks, Vincia. And I think it really starts with being deliberate and committed to what's best for the organization. And as board members have to be very, I'll say, action-oriented and focus on how they're going about it. Now, when you look at the issue of being kind and nice and considerate to the dynamics in the boardroom versus making the right decision and being firm about it, I think that's also a bit influenced by the different cultures that we represent and where we come from. And to Cyril's point, really recognizing that we come from different backgrounds, but still putting forward the interests of the company is really what should drive us. So that in whatever differences or factors we need to take in consideration, doing the right thing should be the one thing that we should not want to compromise. And for me, that really starts with the foundation of how we show up and how we enter a boardroom. And that's whether I come to serve or I come to be a board member, which comes with title and it comes with status.
Yeah.
And when we believe and subscribe to a culture of service, and culture of service does not mean that you need to be polishing people's shoes.
Yeah.
But culture of service means that you're serving the purpose of that organization. And board members finding that common purpose is really what's important. And like you said, one can commit to that and commit to being the right thing and being firm and not be afraid to make decisions. And I think, given the different cultures we come from, sometimes we allow that too much to influence who we are and what decisions we make, because we're afraid of meeting each other at the next wedding or the next funeral.
True.
And we don't take the right decision because how do I face people? And in the end, we erode value, not just for shareholder, but also make it impossible for management to perform because we're not firm enough and we dilly-dallying with each other. And that really breeds, I'll say, contempt, because in the end, when you're soft with one board member on an issue or you don't deal with an issue the right way, you have to return the same favor to the next board member when a similar issue arises. So it creates a culture of not making decisions or not taking the right decision when it needs to be done.
Sure. You really literally spoke to what I want to ask about next, and that's the firmness in decision making. I like that, we all brought together certain aspects of culture and building, how that we build that culture, how we shouldn't be cowardice in building that culture, but how we should actually perform in the best interest of the entity by actually making the decisions, which is sort of much beyond personality, isn't it? And that brings me to wanting to know about maintaining independent thinking, clear and fearless communication, and innovative contributions among board members, which is very important to this culture that we're talking about and making decisions, isn't it? We have found that overreaching shareholders, commanding shadow directors, inactive directors, timid players, like he has mentioned, conflicting mindsets, and autocratic chairpersons have thwarted this culture of really thinking clearly, speaking clearly and fearlessly, and having innovative contributions. And I want to just ask us, what can be done to restore healthy debates through the culture of inquiry? Let me go to Mr. Saro for that.
Yeah, so Mervyn King, in one of his books, The Healthy Company, said that the board chair must be friendly, but not too friendly. So it's striking that balance. So in this case that you're referring to, the board chair plays a really, really important role in understanding his team, the members on the board. It is important for him to be able to read body language, to be able to listen carefully, to see when somebody is kind of withdrawing for whatever reason, to also see when a comment that has been made, somebody used the word, makes a board member cringes. So it's his ability to pull somebody into the conversation and to ask, Melanie, what do you think about this? Or to manage the too talkative director, to thank him for his contribution, to say, but let's just, so I hear you, but let's just park that and maybe find from somebody else as well. Yeah. So the board chairperson plays a very important role in how he manages the team and the conversation. And on an ongoing basis, on almost every board meeting, in private conversations, encourage people to open up and to speak up. That there is not a right or a wrong answer. It's an opinion, and let's debate the opinion. But I think what's important also, we're all under pressure when it comes to board meetings and the times that board meetings take. So you have to manage the time that you spend on a specific topic as well. You cannot allow people to talk forever. You need to be able to manage that time as well.
And very important aspects, isn't it, especially when it comes to time management. How can you really encourage that debate and get really fruitful conversation out of there for the best decision making? I think that's very important. Let me go to Ms. Ndulula for that.
And I want to maybe make it colorful and cite a board that might have a director that is a lecturer by birth, a director that loves to hear the voice because it's a good baritone voice. And then you've got obviously the one that's more silent and withdrawn and need to be pulled out. Yeah. And then you've got the one that likes to repeat what others have said. And then you've got people who like to make their points, but they repeat it 3 times to make sure that it hits home. So let's pray that no chairperson have to deal with all those characters.
That's a good
but even less that the chairperson is not one of those characters.
Exactly.
And really finding that balance, as Sarah said, having a bit of people skills is required from the chair. And the chairperson have a big obligation to manage that. Even your reference to an overreaching shareholder, it's the obligation of the chair to manage the relationship, because I believe the shareholder has a right to take an interest on how a representative board of directors manages the affairs of the company. But in selecting board members, you don't really always know what you're getting and how they're going to run their business. So how do you manage ensuring that the interests are served right and that board members are actually performing versus allowing a culture to develop that actually erodes value? And that's where the relationship of a board, the board chair with the shareholder, but also the board chair really being intuitive to some extent and taking interest in knowing that they need to allow debate, but in the end, decisions have to be made at the end of the board meeting, resolutions have to be signed off, and management need to have mandate, and allowing just hitting around the bush or nice conversation so that we can have enough hours to book if we are paid per hour. True. Are some of the challenges that the chairperson set. So it's a bit of an art, I would say. Yeah. There's not really complete science. I think there's tact and skills that one can develop over time, but a lot of it is keeping your ear on the ground and being observant and then managing the process.
What about that board member that's totally always, and I like the way you categorize the different types of personalities in there. What about that director, even a chairperson, who's always just pliant? He's always just amening to everything, you know? I agree with everybody else. How do we get that person to fully participate in and to contribute fully in conversations?
So I think it's also prompting the person to engage more and maybe asking probing questions more with that individual so that they say more than just I agree with what the other person said. Yeah. So it's really about probing. But I think what's also key, and I think, you know, most people have said that already, it's about knowing each other to a certain degree. So I think one needs to understand the different individuals that are in the board, understand their personalities and how they do things. And it's about being able to read the room properly, and emotional intelligence is very key, specifically for the board chairperson, but for everyone. But, you know, you can try probing questions and that might not work, and then you need to maybe try a different tactic, and maybe you need to engage with the person also outside of the board meeting to understand a bit better. So I think there's not one answer in terms of how to get that person to open up more, but I think you should start off with, you know, probing questions and maybe giving that person sort of an area that they need to present on or, you know, say more about, just to get them to, you know, elaborate more and not just be the yes man or the one that just agrees to what everyone else says.
That made me think of something that's very important, and we're talking about it, debating in a boardroom. The reason why we don't want to encourage a culture of round-robin resolutions is because we really want to bring about independent thinking, but also innovative contributions together in one room. We want to talk about issues to the extent, and you've mentioned that obviously there's not always enough time to deliberate on issues. So we really want to get to a place where everybody can contribute properly and also valuable contributions that will lead to decision making. That's important at the end of the day. And I think you really have a difficult situation where that you have a yes person all the time, because even when they have to write to the board before the meeting and say, these are my contributions in writing because I can't express myself, you still need them to be able to counter some of the conversations that happen. And I think it's always, like you said, emotional intelligence. It's a culture, it's an art, and it's, I must say, something that needs to be developed properly. Now, in order for boards to carry out their fiduciary duties effectively, and I'm just latching on to what I've just said, timely and thought-provoking and reasonable decisions need to be made collectively as a board, and it just speaks to the point that I made now. And this is often impeded by lack of resolution of issues or disagreements. And now I really want us to just talk about personalities, people who are each other instead of attacking the issue and the relevant organizational issues that need to be addressed instead of personalities that are clashing. How best, and I think not only does it speak to the board culture, it then spills over into the organization and obviously impacts the board management relationship and so on. But we don't want to touch necessarily on that. We just want to speak about in the boardroom, how can we maintain a healthy relationship and focus on issues directly. Melanie, do you want to take that?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay.
So I think it's, I've lost my train of thought here, but in terms of, how that we directly make sure that we focus on the right things and the right issues. It's important that, there needs to be focus that, in terms that the board chairperson also makes sure that we focus the conversation and at the same time, I've really lost my train of thought all of a sudden.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And I think, that, and just to bring you back to it, the issues that we read about in the papers really are about personality issues. People are trying to show that I'm better than you, or that my ego is more stronger than yours, or stuff like that, instead of, and I wrote about it when I was writing about board management relationship. If we look at that, then we forget about the bigger picture. And you've mentioned that if we look beyond the culture, there's something else that we're trying to serve here. It's the entity. And so focusing on those issues. Yeah, that's what I really want us to look at.
So if I can just come in here. So it's about, if you allow people to behave a certain way, you're also creating that culture. So it's about making sure that if someone is behaving in a certain way within the board and it's not acceptable, that gets called out and that gets changed, because otherwise it's seen as the new acceptable way of how we should behave or how we should do things. So and that comes with candor and being candid about saying, this isn't the way we should be doing things. And unfortunately, we say that the tone is set at the top. So if we allow that at a board level, you're allowing it to go through all the way to management at the end of the day. So it's really about, and when I said in the beginning, it's defining those ways of working. It's defining how do we want to work with each other? How do we want to engage with each other? And what is acceptable behavior and what is not acceptable behavior? And if you've defined that up front, and then even if you see things changing, it's also about self-reflecting or reflecting as a board. Are we still working together effectively? And if we're not, what are the levers that we need to change to make sure that we are working together effectively? And that, everyone's personality is taken into consideration, that everyone can perform at their highest. I think it's about understanding each other and then also calling out those things, bad performance or whatever it may be that's not acceptable.
You look like you're ready for this one.
And maybe just to add, I think egos is the biggest problem that we've seen. I've served on many boards. I think I started serving when I was 24.
Sure.
And I have not seen something more destructive than egos and interest.
Yes, interest.
I think we should not assume that when people come to serve, they come to serve.
Yes, I get that.
So sometimes people attack the next person because they want to derail the focus from integrity and from the right decision being made. Because there's gain in chaos to some extent. And if something is to be decided on that is going a direction that derails or redirects personal interest to benefit, you create an obstacle, and that's one of the challenges that we face as boards. And I guess it's not unique to Namibia, but one of the challenges that we really have is, I think, our preoccupation with rights, and it's my turn to speak, it's my right, it's my status, it's my title, and not embracing an idea because it comes from the other person. So an idea is good if I'm pushing it, or idea is good when a man promotes it. So you've got all these dynamics in the boardroom that really derates focus from the right issues. And again, it goes back to the chairperson to, as Melanie said, call out these practices, but also invest in finding common denominators. And sometimes it's a common problem and a common challenge that will make a board to change how it works together. Because if you're faced with sometimes a common enemy, then you can actually rally behind that problem and do that. But yeah, I think we shouldn't be naive and think that board members are necessarily there for the good of the company, or that out of, say, 6 board members, 4 are necessarily there. You might have a division of 3 very committed and 3 non-committed, and you have to find that ability to basically tilt the culture into the right direction, and finding those platforms for, whether it's now through workshops addressing a common problem or just team building activities to direct and then firm decision making in the end that might be unpleasant.
So that firm decision making keeps coming back through the conversation. Mr. Van Zyl?
Yeah, I think adding on to what you've just said is this whole issue of intent. Why do we serve on boards? And often when you suddenly just ask people, why are you on this board?
Yeah.
You can see people had not really thought about it. So the question is, are you on the board because of your CV? Are you on the board because of your ego? Are you on the board because of your salary? Are you on, why are you on the board? Or are you really on the board because you want to serve? And in fact, Mervyn King is talking about the way that we have rewarded people in the past, the whole issue of creating shareholder value, the way that we remunerate people with bonuses, and what is the measure or the definition of success in our business. Maybe that is changing in the way that we organize ourselves. And it's moving towards this whole issue of sustainable value creation for the entity. That's where the topic or the theme of shared value creation is coming from. So it's not about me. The moment that the board see that any individual is becoming or is trying to become more important in the board, it becomes a problem. And the way I think to manage that strongly, and again the point of the chairperson of the board, is you need to create what they call aligned commitment. Okay. So how do you create aligned commitment? It's that whole issue of how do you align the commitment of the board members? And that's firstly by making sure that everybody is on board for the strategic intent of the organization. So that's the values, the vision, the mission, the strategic imperatives, the stuff that you really need to achieve. That's the one part of it. The second one is the culture that we say on this board, this is how we're going to do that. And that's through, as you've mentioned, the culture of inquiry, the inquisitive, decisive, collaborative, discipline, all those things, or a combination of that. And when somebody then steps out of line in those cases, is to bring him back and to say, but what you're busy doing is not in line with our culture, and in doing that, we will not achieve this sustainable value creation that we aim for as an organization.
And I think when I'm listening to you, I'm just thinking that board inductions are probably important. Yes, we do board inductions, but now that I know that I've been doing board inductions and trainings for a little bit, it just brings me to a realization that we don't talk about culture. We speak about these are your roles and this is your role and these are your responsibilities, fiduciary duties, and we speak about the hardcore technical things that are expected of board member, but we never address the issues of personality, the issues of the EQ, the emotional intelligence and common purpose. We just never get there. And both of you have mentioned that common purpose that should pull through in everything that pertains to the board of directors. And maybe Melanie, how important is board inductions to creating this culture?
I think it's highly important because remember, that's actually one of the first opportunities you have to meet as a board. So, and it's important that one, has that opportunity. Like I said in the beginning, the board's a team. So they also need to go through all of these dynamics that a team goes through in order to perform. So that induction is for that first impression and all of that happens to get the understanding of the company. And sometimes board induction is just for the newbies, it's for the new directors. The rest of the directors may not be there, but it's that opportunity to define what is the shared purpose and the shared beliefs amongst the board, and how will we do things, how will we be working together going forward. So I mean, it's like when you join a company, that first week when you join is so important, because that's going to set the scene probably probably for going forward. So it's highly important that, you know, a board induction is not just theory thrown at the person, and it's also that the first opportunity for the board member to understand the dynamics of the company as well. So, yeah, no, it's, for me, board induction is extremely important.
I think so too. I think really, and it just speaks to leadership. I mean, you did mention the chairperson, and I think of course, when the board is initiated or has been inducted in that beginning stage, clearly the board of directors and the chairperson is sort of on the same wavelength in terms of leadership, without the one taking the leading role over the others. But it's probably a cardinal point for us to note that the leadership should really take that leading. And also, just to invite, you said that not everybody comes to induction because they feel like we already served on boards, we already know enough about, you know, board leadership or even just what we are expected of. But importantly, as amongst that specific group to create the culture, I think we should encourage that board inductions be held for all types of board of directors, whether they are old or new. And now I just want to talk about that change in leadership. I'm speaking leadership now at board and management level. So whichever level, it normally triggers culture change, that change in leadership. And also on the other side of the hand, static leadership, when there's no change over a period of time, can also harbor a stagnant culture. And both can work in the best interest of the entity if there's good culture, whether it's been harbored over a time or is newly found, well, good culture can be maintained, or to the detriment of the organization in the event that good culture is not improved to meet the changing times or to encourage board refreshing, for instance, or that bad culture perpetuated in direct opposition of board refreshing. And when I speak of board refreshing, I'm just speaking about culture change, because we've had the same board for a long time. Therefore, no one is thinking differently. No one is even prompted to act differently. We have become so familiar, and you know, we say that familiarity breeds contempt. And we've become so familiar with each other that we're not able to function differently. Who should play the role? I'm just thinking about the dynamics of this, of the boards that are changing and the dynamics of the boards that are static. Some boards that are appointed over and over, same people on the same board for 3 terms. How does that work? Mr. Van Zyl, what comes to mind when I'm thinking about these dynamics?
Yeah, sure. So it's very interesting. I think the way that the public enterprises do it at the moment, in fact, what happened to us is the whole board has been replaced in one go. Now, that's very difficult.
Yeah.
Then to pick up a culture, to pick up the way things are being done in the organization, to understand the organization and how it works. And I think this almost revolving kind of where you have half board members to be there for a period of time and then replace only half, so that there's continuity and there's a little bit of what's the right word, intellectual capacity that stays behind.
Of the refreshing,
Of the refreshing. So I think change is inevitable, and there are reasons when the culture of the organization will change, but it's important for us to understand that there's a difference between culture and climate, for instance. So culture is something that develops over time. Mm-hmm. And we must understand that whether we influence the culture or whether we do not do that, a culture will develop.
Yeah.
The question is whether we influence or not. It might be the difference between a positive or negative culture. And the point that you've made just now around induction workshops and all of those good things, the importance of that, it gives the board the opportunity to think about how we want to do things. And we've spoken about a number of the different culture types, or combination of those different culture types that you want to have. So leadership change may affect that the culture is going to change, because we know culture is driven from the top. It's this old story of a fish rottens from the head. You know, it's that same thing.
Yeah.
If that leading or direction is not there, then you cannot expect the rest of the team to have direction as far as that is concerned, when it talks to how we deal with things. But the environment also sometimes necessitates a change in the way that we do things. Yeah. If I just think about the massive impact that COVID, for instance, had in the whole economy, the world. In Namibia, we've been 10 years ago, it had been a thriving country with 5% GDP growth and everything went hunky-dory. And then we got the worst drought in history, and the way that you deal with stuff then changes. Then suddenly the economy tumbled, and then, on top of that, and then COVID happened on top of that. So you cannot then sit with a static change that goes, a static culture that says, but this is the way we've done it forever. We know change is the one constant in the world. And again, the chair, but it's not just the chair. I think all the directors must be aware that when the environment is changing, when leadership is changing, when change is necessitated, let's not shy away from it. Let's take it on and let's deal with the change.
And I know you are a board chairperson right now, so you're talking chair and sort of taking responsibility and accountability, which I think is a very good thing, and it's on a public platform, by the way. So well done for pointing back to yourself. But who should actually be driving that culture, dynamics in terms of there's a static culture, then there's the changing culture. Who should be even on top of that? And you can latch on to the first part of the question as well.
I think individually board members should do that, but ultimately I think that the chairperson is entrusted with a responsibility to make sure that things work. And as Sarah mentioned, the scenario where a full board changes really creates big burden, not just for the board, but also for management, because now you have to allow culture to develop, you have to allow trust to develop, you have to allow technical understanding by the new board member to develop about the entity they are to lead, because not everybody necessarily comes in as a technical expert on a board that they serve. But I'm a big proponent of a level of discomfort, both at management as well as at board. So having always new thinking, new blood, highly experienced, less experienced, older directors, younger director, good diversity. I think we should always steer away from a comfort level in a board, especially where we need to be taking care of other people's assets. But I think we do it probably more when it's our own asset, and it should even be more when you're entrusted, especially on behalf of a public interest, that commitment to make sure that we don't embrace or allow a culture for complacency to develop, that should be every director's responsibility. So I think the shareholder plays a big role as well, and board members should sometimes say, you know what, we need a bit of change. Let me volunteer to step down, stuff like that. So there is a level of individual responsibility to getting the company to become the best it can. And if it means that change must come from an individual board member because they have that insight, they should pioneer that.
I think, Melanie, I like the fact that Ms. Ndulula is mentioning that initiative from an individual. I like it because there are two aspects to it. The one is when you think you are so good that you don't want to step off from a position because you think that only you can save that entity, or when you have grown cold in the position, but yet you don't step down. And I like when you say, recognize when it's the time to step off. What do you say about that? The individual really taking charge in terms of culture. We've been talking about the leader, the chairperson taking charge, but how about the individual board members? Should they not also be, feeling that accountability to say, oh no, I'm not even contributing to the culture in this room, I should step away?
Yeah, so a team is only as good as its weakest link. So it's important that each individual on the board reflects actually after every single meeting and then look at, did I add value? Did I really add value in this meeting? Because if I didn't, then I need to tweak something. And, maybe it's understanding where I need to get more understanding of a technical aspect or industry aspect or whatever it may be. But it's important that we each as individuals reflect and look at, am I adding value? Am I giving my part? And if I'm not, and I'm consistently, and I realize, but maybe I don't have, maybe it's my purpose has moved, or whatever it may be, then having that that candor and that, to say that, okay, I must step down. I'm not adding value anymore. So rather bring someone else in that wants to be there and add that value again to the organization.
No, I like that. I like the fact that, I really didn't want us to speak particularly about board composition, but now I realize in the depth of this conversation how important that is actually. And you've mentioned it. You said that you like a level of discomfort, and I want to have you speak a little bit more about that the dynamics, the older, the younger, the experience, but the less experience that is coming with some type of vigor and some type of energy to the room. And I just want you to speak a bit more about that dynamism in the board composition and how important that is to creating a culture, a good board culture.
And Vinci, I think it's important not just for a particular board, but even for us as a nation.
Yeah.
We tend to, I'll say, overuse, over-socialize individuals. And then it breeds and affirms the reflection that I am as good, very good at this, and maybe I have developed the level of efficiencies that others can't, or skills, which is not true. Because I think people can learn. I always say if you're smart, that means others are as smart or probably smarter. But there's always different levels.
True.
And nobody is as unique. We might be unique, but not as unique as we sometimes would like to think. So it is important for us to not endorse that, because we are gullible.
Yeah.
And what we reflect to each other can affirm certain beliefs which are unhealthy, not just for the individual, but for the companies or the organizations where people serve as board members. So one, we have an obligation to make sure that we do not contribute to conceitedness, if that's even a word.
Yeah, conceitedness, yes.
So the second thing is, as a country, we small population. How do we make sure that we can create an adequate skill set out there of board members, and also create a positiveness to younger people who should actually want to learn, because they can see how companies are governed and how boards are functioning. And we can only do that if we have enough showcases of well-managed and well-governed boards that embraces this diversity of young, of gender, of allowing inquisitive minds to actually sit around a table which has had a culture of people who've served together for 20 years. I think the shareholder is very relevant in making sure that the boards that they appoint creates this dynamics. But board members that have been around have a duty to embrace the ones that are coming on board, and not tell people this is how we've always done things. Because it's so comfortable and it's so easy to actually brush people off without even using a lot of words, because they're questioning the way that things are done. But when people are appointed on boards, they also need to know what is and decide what they sign up for.
Yeah.
If you sign up for a board and your views are not regarded, I think individual board members should be signing off or telling themselves that this is not my time well spent.
Yeah.
Because if my views are not heard, but I am making contribution, but it becomes a culture that doesn't want to change, and that's not what you signed up for, you should step away from a culture like that, because it also sends a message. Yeah. It might not be to the benefit of this particular board member, but it will be to the benefit of the next new inquisitive young mind that joins that. Because that board will remember why the previous young person left, and they wouldn't want a repeat of that.
I like that part, and Mr. Fansel, I need you to latch on that, because importantly, stepping away when you are no longer relevant, stepping away when you're not making the significant impact you wanted to make or would have loved to make, because the setting doesn't allow you to do that, or maybe you've just become irrelevant.
Yeah, so I was thinking as you're talking, I don't know whether the audience, how many of them really understand or is familiar with the world of rugby, but the New Zealand rugby team has been very successful for a very long period of time, 10, 15 years, massively successful. So somebody then studied what it is that they're doing, what is making them so successful, and applied that to the world, the corporate world. And one of the key things that they've learned from that team is, when do you fire your best player?
Sure.
Now that's a tough thing to do, to say, but this is the guy that scores all the goals. This is the guy that, the best defender, whatever. Now we must fire him. That thinking about your people is exactly the point that you're latching on now. And I think that with the world changing, and we see it in Namibia already, the way that the growing stakeholder scrutiny of board performance and organizational performance is increasing by the day. We've been a very submissive nation, Namibia, up until now. But I think that is changing, and people are starting to demand change to make sure that boards perform, people perform. Where I'm coming from, and I wasn't sure whether you're asking me the question because you knew that, I didn't retire at the age of 60. I retired at the age of 55 or 58 because I, at that point, thought it was the right thing to do. We had a philosophy or policy in the organization that we called 5-year refresh. So after every 5 years, you review your relevance and your ability to take the organization into the next 5 years. So I was 58 at the time, but I also was in the position that I thought I had the 2 best CEO candidates in Namibia in the organization to be able to take over from me. Now, the point that you've made earlier, we become a global player. These top caliber candidates that we have, if you don't offer them that excitement, that career progression, whatever, you're going to lose them. Not just to the competition, but you're going to lose them out of the country, out of Namibia. They just won't stay here. So it takes a very mature person to get to that point to say, you know what, I have enough, I've done enough, it is time for me to move on so new people with new thinking can come in and take over and move on. So I think there's a lot, but this thing of the rugby team that says, when do you fire your best player? I think it's a very relevant question that we need to consider.
My goodness, that's a tough question, isn't it? I think, wow, I've not thought about it. Why would you want to fire your best player, right? But when you think of it in depth, it's really to bring some refreshing. And you don't want a person to be, you've mentioned it, to be overly corseted in a way, because then that glory on them also can break them. And I think that's a very good question, in the sense that you want to preserve that person and even make them greater by having them influence other pockets of, spheres of community by not just being in the one place. So very, very good philosophy to be able to step down and step out when you have become overly relevant, or when you are no longer relevant, or when you feel that this is just enough and somebody else can now take over. But you've also mentioned, and these are the good scenarios, but I'm now thinking about where the board culture is absolutely rotten and no one is holding the other accountable. Who should step in and take decisions to say, no, this board, the culture is not good. And certainly it's the shareholder, but how can the shareholder go about this, refreshing boards and making sure where boards are not performing optimally because of their culture? What should they do? Remove the whole board? What is that needs to be done in a scenario like that? Melanie, you look so ready for that one.
So, I mean, it's fact. An organization with a bad culture can still meet its objectives. The thing is just that it's probably not sustainable over the long term. Yeah. So I think, if one realizes that you've got a dysfunctional board, or you've got a bad culture, let's not call it a dysfunctional board, but you've got a bad culture within the board, before the shareholder steps in, it's about probably, again, we're referring to the chairperson to actually step in first, if they're not the reason maybe for the bad culture. Exactly. But it's really about, stepping in and going, it's a lot about seeing, what are we doing wrong? And what is the desired culture that we want to get to? So what are those levers that we need to change in order to get there? But now if you've got the chairperson also part of this bad culture, and the shareholder needs to step in, it probably is that case that you need to look at which of the board members are maybe still effective that you can keep, that you keep some institutional knowledge about the organization, and then rotate all the others off. Or is it the fact that you need to just rotate the whole board? Maybe it is so bad that you just need to put a new board in place. And change is the only constant that we've got nowadays. So, I mean, if you've got a bad culture in the board and you rotate the whole board, you know, you give them that opportunity to start afresh again. It's not ideal because you do lose all that institutional knowledge that there might be. So it's not a clear-cut answer in terms of what you can do. You need to assess the situation and see, you know, what would be the best, what are the levers that we need to pull first in order to sort of like save the situation, if I can call it that. But it's really about, you know, reflection, self-reflection is so important to understand what is the problem, what are the things that we need to change, and knowing where you want to get to. Because if you don't know where you want to get to, it was also difficult to know what you need to change. So having an understanding of what is that desired end state that we want to get to.
I like what you mentioned. You subtly mentioned that an assessment should be done, and I think that's what's important, isn't it? You don't want to just abruptly or arbitrarily remove the entire board. And in circumstances, you did say, and it's correct, you probably want to remove the entire board, but you might have to do this at the backdrop of a reasonable decision, isn't it? And Mr. Van Zyl, you know, the shareholder, and you might have mentioned that the shareholder is the one who should be doing this. It's probably a difficult situation for the shareholder to step in this position and say, it's the whole board that's rotten or not. But I don't think you just come to that conclusion. You probably should do an assessment.
Yeah, so I think that's a very important aspect. And again, Mervyn King also refers to that. You have to do board evaluations on at least every 2 years, but preferably every year. And those board questionnaires should be designed so that you can identify board performance as a whole, committee performance, but also individual performance. And it's a self-assessment, but it's also an assessment of board members, of other
Peer
people.
Review.
The outcome of those reviews then becomes very important for the board to discuss fully, openly, and where they are, and identify the shortcomings, and then agree or discuss how to deal with this. When it's a specific member of a board, the chairperson obviously has a very important role to play. I think the other important thing that in the boards that I've been involved in so far, which is very important, is a one-on-one conversation of the board chair with the individual board members. That's over and above the assessment or the evaluation. So in there, you also pick up things about, it's not a gossiping story, but it's just, you know, how do you assess the other members of the board? Do you think they add value? And it comes back to this corporate coward story that I referred to earlier. You as board chair also then has the obligation to highlight to individuals where they are not performing up to standard. So a lot of it comes from the board, from within the board and from the board chair. I'm not at all a what do you call it? A fan of replacing the whole board at once. I think it's like anything else. There's always one apple that's a little bit more rotten than the rest, and identifying that individual and removing him. If it's the chair, it's the chair. If it's the vice chair or if it's the board, removing that individual, and then gradually over time, you know, start influencing and affecting and changing where you have to. But the shareholder is critical in that role if the board doesn't come to the party. But in my mind, the responsibility sits squarely on the board and the board chair.
Removing the entire board, and speaking of the more rotten apple than the less rotten apple, what do you think about the removal? I mean, we did mention, or we sort of touch on the fact that sometimes the entire board is rotten. And I know we want to maintain continuity. I think we want to maintain institutional knowledge, etc. But what if the whole board is actually rotten when you've done the assessment?
I think if the whole board is rotten, then the shareholder must make the decision and replace the board. Look, I mean, as Cyril said, it's not the ideal situation, but it's not an impossible situation. And it doesn't mean that when a new board has been appointed, it's completely new, that it cannot restart, create, I'll say, a common agenda. And in fact, it might be an opportunity to define that common agenda and purpose, and rally not just the board, but also management behind achieving the company objective. Because, I mean, ultimately, the objective doesn't really change with a new board. If a company is in the financial sector, it will continue to execute its its functions, right? So it's the leadership component that then changes, and it can be an opportunity in very extreme situation, but it's really extreme situation. But a new board that comes in like that will require, I'll say, a good balance in terms of its composition and a level of maturity, because it's a big burden on management to deal with a complete new board. It's also a burden amongst the board members because they don't know each other at all, so they now need to find each other, learn to trust each other, which on the other side is actually good because they're this careful with each other that it's unlikely that bad stuff will just creep in from the very beginning. But it just means that it's a lot more work for management, it's a lot more work for the board, but it's a new opportunity. It's kind of like a new birth type of thing. But yes, I think if things are this bad, the shareholder need to preserve value. And for me, delayed decision to do that is even more costly, because then the damage gets done at management level. You lose good people. You sometimes are left with people who don't really have a choice or interest, or are just interested in the packages. So it is important for the shareholder to make a decision timely when it needs to be made before too much value has been eroded. And we've got enough examples of delayed decisions, and I think in justice they say delayed justice is denied justice, but I think delayed decision making is just really as bad for business. And for me, it's always important to say, would I do this with my own business? Because if we are committed to preserving personal values, we should be committed to preserving public value, and that even goes for the shareholder representative, be it in the form of a minister, that it should be about preserving the public value, because this asset belongs to the nation and not to the shareholder's personal view, because sometimes that is also a very person-driven or personality-driven relationship, which introduces risk for a board as well. And managing that, I guess, is even more complex. So
and it sounds, when I sum it up, all of what you've said now, especially about that thorny part of removing an entire board, which is not, I'm not trying to advocate for it, but I'm saying that if you are a fearless thinker, and I know our chairperson Steve likes to mention that, adage of being a fearless thinker, and having to be a fearless thinker is probably what we lack in today's leadership, making timely decisions, but also making radical decisions for the benefit of the organization and generally for the country, ultimately for the country. And that fearless thinking, I think, should pull through the threads that we're trying to pull together in society. And time does run really quickly, so I'm just going to ask each and every one of you for a final thought. So we've been talking about board culture, and this is quite important, very important, and you have underscored how important this is, because we've got good people in boards, but we don't have collectively sometimes a good functioning board because of culture that is lacking. And I want you all to think quickly about the one thing that you can say to boards and to the appointing authorities, which is the shareholder, in how can we cultivate the quintessential, the ideal board culture that we can say this is the one that will help us to be more ideal in our functioning as board of directors. I'm gambling here, but I'm going to start with the gentleman and say, can you give us your final remarks?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I'm going to use a few big words.
That's fine.
For boards to be strategically dynamic, remember we're responsible for strategy.
Yeah.
For us to be governance focused, we're responsible for governance. For us to be performance orientated, the public holds us responsible for how we perform. And for us to be stakeholder satisfying, if we want to be sustainable over the long time, it is absolutely key to pay a lot more attention to board culture and not just to corporate culture. So I'm one of the first guilty ones. Only with this assignment, when we started preparing for this, I realized how important it is for the board on the normal annual strategy breakaways of the group, where we formulate strategy for the next year or for the next 5 years. It's important for us to have a separate discussion around how do we want to do things as we move forward. As you mentioned earlier, unlike other areas of governance, the composition of risk, the succession, the strategic planning, all those good things, board culture is nowhere defined in any of our guiding documents. So I think a good place to start is that we need to go back and look at our respective board charters and make provision for discussion around board culture and board conversations, to have this, what I referred to earlier as aligned commitment in the board in taking the organization forward.
That's quite rich. Thank you so much. I really need to sum that up, if you will allow me, in probably a piece, if this set allows me, because I think this is quite a critical, and I did say in a previous paper that I wrote that I'm going to write about board culture, but if you'll allow me to borrow some of your thoughts, and it will be quoted, but definitely a very important, absolutely critical topic that we're talking about. Ms. Ndulula, your final thoughts?
I think in closing, firm decision making doesn't imply being aggressive and, I'll say, haste, irresponsible. I think we can be firm and caring. And because I'm a woman, I bring a lot of gender bias conversations usually in the boardrooms, which at times attracts humor, and humor is important in the boardroom as well. But I think in closing, really what's important for me to live is to recognize, or for directors to recognize, that they're kind of the conduit and the middle path of the organization, right, to the relationship with the shareholder, relationship with management. And when the culture of the board is good and prioritizing the right things, it goes through to the entire organization. So it's an obligation that individual directors have. I guess, our desire to be individually contributing, recognized as independent thinkers, shouldn't override the importance of collective value. Because I think in the end, as a board, what's important is what we represent as a unit, albeit, individual contributions, bringing those thoughts and decisions together. Just that sense of responsibility that ultimately we should contribute to making the organization better off when we leave, that we can look back and say, have I contributed to making this a better place? And are we really doing it for our grandchildren? Can we just forget our generation and the next generation and say, when the grandchildren looks back, what do we say have we invested? What contributions have we made in the governance environment? Because as the president says, the institutions should survive. They should survive us all. In the end, we should have trust in what we've helped created.
Fantastic. Melanie?
So I think a lot has been said, but it's really about being deliberate about discussing what is the culture that we want to have. Is it a high-performing culture? What does that mean that we want to drive through to the rest of the organization? So it's really that deliberate conversation that needs to happen about culture, which I don't think is always happening. Like Sarel said, it gets discussed at an organization-wide level, but not necessarily at a board level. And then to see how do the two interact with each other. And at Deloitte, when you become a partner, they say, you must leave the organization in a better state than when you joined it or when you started. And that's really where you want to get to. You want to make sure that you're adding that value and contributing to the culture and contributing to the organization in the best interest of the organization, for society and for, the country as a whole. So, it's about deliberate. We need to be deliberate. If we want to drive something, you need to be deliberate about it.
So we've come to the end of this segment, unfortunately, and I'm absolutely floored by the comments and the contributions that you've made as speakers, and we want to thank you for that. I want to highlight that board culture is absolutely critical for boards to perform optimally, but for entities to thrive. And you have mentioned some important things that we are going to take away. And I would like our viewers to be cognizant and to keep an eye out for the quotes that are coming in the following few days from the people that have been speaking so adequately and eloquently tonight. Board culture should be defined, I heard. And then I heard that board culture should permeate from the top throughout into the company. And then I heard that board culture should be deliberately taken care of in the boardroom and across the company. And I want to leave us with those thoughts, very eloquent, but very deep and very essential thoughts, and say thank you for joining us tonight on Fireplace Conversations from the Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance. We want to welcome you back next week on Thursday, 6 p.m., same place, same time. See you again, and thank you so much for gracing us with your expertise. We appreciate you.
Thanks for having us.